everybody, and welcome back to, I'm sad to say, the final murder at bedtime with Lyndon on YouTube. I'm afraid I have finally given up the constant fight with the YouTube algorithm. Murder at Bedtime will still continue in podcast form wherever you listen to your podcasts, as will the exiled yellowbelly on YouTube. But unfortunately, due to falling figures, work commitments and just life in general getting in the way, I just haven't got the time to record more of these episodes on the YouTube platform. So thank you so much for the support over the last 3 years. It really has been a pleasure to do these stories for you on what has always just been a hobby. Started for a few friends on Facebook to get us all through the pandemic, which grew into a YouTube channel. Who knows, one day I may be back, but for the time being, thank you to all those lovely people that I have met on the way. I've enjoyed your company, and I hope I will continue to see your comments on Instagram and Facebook telling me your opinions of the podcast and the exiled yellowbelly. So, for the last time on YouTube, if you are a returning listener, you know very well by now that I think you are all awesome. Murder at Bedtime is a 10 to 20 minute, no frills, waffle free, true crime bedtime story. So plump up your pillows and pull up your duvet one last time. As unusually for me, I'm going to start off this story with some background waffle because it connects to this week's episode. So apologies for that, but I feel that I need to set the scene. Anyway, over the recent Christmas holidays, in that bit between after Boxing Day and before New Year's Eve, I think it's called Twixmas or something, I decided to take myself off to the city of Derby for a couple of nights, primarily because I had bought tickets to go on the Derby Jail Ghost Walk, hosted by a bit of a hero of mine, Richard Felix, the historian and ghost hunter, probably best known for being on TV's Most Haunted, who also happens to own the Derby Old Jail, so to say I was excited would probably be an understatement. A 3-hour ghost walk around Derby with Richard Felix ending at his jail for a condemned man's supper. I was in my element, so I booked 2 nights in a Derby Premier Inn and drove the 150 miles to the city. What could possibly go wrong? Well, Richard Felix was a no-show. That's what. We were informed in the first 30 seconds that Richard would not be attending, as he was now old and had gone abroad to do some filming. So, not what it said on the tin. And you could feel the disappointment in the room straight away. I'm sure I wasn't the only one of the 26 or so people who had come primarily to see Richard Felix. I certainly, admittedly, was very grumpy for the rest of the evening. Well, until the condemned man's supper. It was delicious. And to be honest, our guide, dressed as Jack Sparrow for some reason, I believe he did mention something about not having time to get changed after his day job. The mind boggles. Anyway, he made a good fist of it. So, why am I telling you all this? Well, it's why we were out on the tour. We stopped at a pub for some refreshment, and we sit in an upstairs room that's been put aside for us, that we are told the story of probably Derby's most famous murder, and we're shown the actual cutthroat razor that the crime was committed with, complete with bloodstains. It had been mounted and framed and was now passed around our group. Call me ghoulish, but this was by far the highlight of the tour for me and lifted me from my grumpiness for a very short while. And I decided that I wanted to look into the crime more deeply and share it with you. So after all that waffle and the big build-up, let's hope it's worth it, as I tell you the story of Richard Thorley and the gruesome murder of Eliza Morrow. Richard Thorley was angry. The year of 1861 had not been a good one for the 26-year-old blacksmith's assistant at Frost's factory in Derby, England. Earlier in the year his wife had sadly passed away, but by chance he had met a beautiful Irish lady, also 26, who worked at Brown's Mill and lived at number 4 Agard Street in the town. Some sort of relationship developed over the next 5 months, which Richard had decided was love, but would seem Eliza Morrow did not feel the same. It now seemed to him that she was playing with him, teasing him, seeing other men behind his back, and was now trying to ignore him. He had now seen her twice in the company of a soldier from the local barracks, which had filled him with rage. The first time being the night of Saturday the 8th of February, when after drinking all day, because of Eliza's refusal to speak to him, he had staggered around to number 4 Agard Street and hammered on the door. Eventually, Eliza could stand the noise no more as he shouted profanities through the door at her, and her neighbours were coming out of their houses to find out what was going on. So she had eventually come to the door. She told him to go away, that whatever he thought they had going on between them was now over, and to stop coming to her house and causing a scene. But Richard had seen over her shoulder the soldier sitting in her house, and he was enraged, shouting threats of violence to her and the soldier. So someone had fetched a policeman, and he was eventually persuaded to leave, go home and sleep it off. But the next day he had not slept it off. In fact, he was even angrier, and when he happened to come across Eliza, the soldier, and Elizabeth's cousin Kate in the street, he challenged the soldier to a fight. Now the soldier chose to ignore him, and the group walked on, with Richard's threats ringing in their ears. He went home, drank heavily, and spent all night sharpening his razor. The next day he passed them again in the street, but this time he ignored them. Let her think that she has got her own way, he thought. And the next day he stayed away from her completely. The first day Eliza hadn't seen Richard all day for 5 months. She may well have inwardly been breathing a sigh of relief. But never count your chickens, because Richard had definitely not gone away. And after being in a fight with a stranger outside a local pub, where he was warned about his aggressive behaviour by the police, he was now sat at home thinking terrible thoughts. He tied a binding around the handle of his razor so it wouldn't close up on him, and he sharpened it repeatedly throughout the night. A deadly plan concocted in his drink-addled and obsessed brain. At just before midnight the following evening, Eliza was awoken by someone beating on a drum loudly outside her window. She got out of bed to see who was causing this racket, and there was Richard Thorley. On seeing her at the window, Thorley launched a tirade of disgusting and offensive vitriol at Eliza and her housemate Anne Webster, shouting that he and the rest of the town, who a large number were now awake and watching the unfolding drama, knew that the pair of them were sharing their beds with a soldier. Eventually, probably due to a crowd forming and Eliza refusing to come outside, he stomped off home to drink more and, yeah, you got it, resharpen his razor. His mind was made up. Tomorrow night he would go back to Agard Street and kill Eliza Morrow. At 8 p.m. the following evening, Richard Thorley was seen by a young witness in a heated argument with her. He saw Thorley pull her towards him, put his arm around her neck, then draw it back, then pushed Eliza against a wall. She was heard to scream, stagger forward and fall to the floor, clutching her throat. Thorley then straddled the poor woman before slashing at her, before standing, dropping his blood-soaked razor and running from the scene. Anne Webster, Eliza's housemate, and two neighbours came running from the house. Anne bravely ran at Thorley before he took flight, but was held back by the other women. The young witness had gone to find a policeman and quickly arrived with some constables, who carried the terribly injured Eliza, who still had a faint pulse, to the sofa in her house, and a doctor was sent for. Shortly, Dr. Joseph German arrived, but there was nothing he could do for Eliza, and she died shortly afterwards. She had 3 deep, large cuts to her throat and face, and many more to her arms and hands, as she had fought for her life. Dr. German believed all the wounds had been made by the razor dropped at the crime scene. The search began immediately, the chief constable sending his men to various places where Thorley might go. One of these men was a man called Detective Sergeant Vesey, a local man who knew Richard Thorley and the places he frequented. So instead of going to Derby train station and catching a train to Burton as he had been instructed, he had a hunch the wanted man would not have ventured far. So he started visiting local pubs. He was successful almost immediately. At the Spa Inn on Abbey Street, the landlord informed the detective that Thorley had come into the pub about 8 p.m. with a blood-stained handkerchief tied around his hand. When asked about his injury, he told the publican he had got it in a fight with a gang of Irishmen in the Abbey Inn. So Vesey next visited this pub, but was informed that no fight had taken place. It was after leaving the Abbey and walking down Canal Street when Vesey saw a familiar face walking towards him. "Hello, Dick," said Vesey to Richard Thorley. "This is a rum do. I've been looking for you, lad. I'm going to have to take you in for the murder of that young girl in Agard Street." Thorley sighed resignedly and replied, "Well, I can't help it. I've done it. I'm glad it's you that came to take me in." Vesey took him into the New Inn to search him, where he noticed dried blood on both hands, and the contents of his trouser pockets were stained with blood. He then escorted his prisoner to the station, where Richard Thorley was charged with the murder of Eliza Morrow, and then he was taken to the county jail. He was to appear at the magistrate's court the very next morning. But in the morning, a very large hostile crowd had assembled at the courthouse, out for blood, so it was decided to take the magistrates to the prisoner instead. So it was at Derby's County Jail on the 20th of February that Richard Thorley was committed to stand trial at the next assizes for the willful murder of Eliza Morrow. The trial started on the 25th of March 1862. Thorley entered a plea of not guilty, the prosecution advising the jury that manslaughter was not an appropriate charge, as this was a premeditated and callous murder. To be honest, the defence were on a hiding to nothing. Witness testimonies as to Thorley's behaviour towards Eliza leading up to the murder. The statement to the police by Thorley admitting that he had decided to kill Eliza on the Tuesday before the actual murder. And the prisoner's matter-of-fact demeanour describing the murder when he himself took the witness stand to give evidence did not help his cause. Also, the judge, Mr. Justice Williams, in his summing up, made it very clear that he had little sympathy for the prisoner or his defence counsel. The jury were out for just 3 minutes and returned a verdict of willful murder of Eliza Morrow. The judge donned the black cap and sentenced Richard Thorley to be hanged by the neck until he be dead. And just before noon on the 11th of April 1862, Richard walked calmly to his place of execution at Derby Jail. He shook hands with the executioner William Calcraft, and at exactly 12 noon he hanged for his crime. After an hour he was cut down, his head shaved, and a plaster death mask was made of his face. He was then buried within the prison's grounds. As for Eliza, she was buried on the Monday following her death. A large crowd gathered on the route from her home to the Nottingham Road Cemetery to pay their last respects to her. Now, in some of my research, Eliza is described as a flirtatious tease who was just leading Thorley on. But on the whole, mostly she was just known as a hard-working, kind young lady. It was also said that the soldier in question was in fact her cousin Kate's boyfriend, but she didn't notify Thorley of this because she mistakenly might have thought that if he thought she had a new man in her life, he would leave her alone. Also, I found some reports that Richard Thorley was a quiet, mild-mannered man until his wife died, and others that he was a brute of a man who had severely beaten Eliza several times during their relationship. Who knows what the real truth is? But whatever it is, nobody deserves to die in the street with such terrible injuries. Anyway, I hope you found that story of some interest. I will put down in the story notes the places I found information on this, but I'd like to give a special mention to a great book that I found was already on my bookcase that was a fantastic help to me, and that was Derbyshire Murders by Martin Bagley, a terrific read. So that's it. The Final Murder at Bedtime, YouTube. Thank you so much for watching and supporting me in the past, and I hope I hear from you again sometime. Night night.